Imagine this. You wake up in a cold stone palace, draped in silks worth more than a peasant's house, servants bowing as they lace you into a gown heavy with jewels, a crown pressed onto your head. From the outside, you look untouchable, the perfect image of beauty and power. But peel back the silks, the portraits painted to flatter, the legends written to glorify, and a different truth leaks through like rot in the walls. Medieval queens and kings were not glowing angels perfumed with roses. They were crawling with parasites, stinking with disease, their bodies rotting away under lace and velvet. And here's the irony: the poor villager, washing in a muddy river once a week, was far cleaner than the crowned heads of Europe. Today, I'm going to take you inside their lives and show you exactly what it smelled like to stand in those glittering halls, what writhed inside those powdered wigs, what women placed against their skin during their periods, why some painted their teeth black on purpose, and why one queen proudly wore the same underwear for 8 months, straight until it fused into her flesh. By the end, you'll never see the word royalty the same way again. You'll see rot, crawling lice, maggots, and the sour reek of perfume, meant to mask death. I'm your host, Cloaked Testament, and this is The Time-Worn Record, where we deep dive into the most mysterious corners of history, unveiling the truths or myths that have been hidden or forgotten. What could possibly be hidden behind the curtain today? Let's start with the sweetness of poison. When sugar first arrived in Europe, it was rarer than gold. To taste it was to flaunt wealth itself. Queen Elizabeth I of England was obsessed. She devoured candied violets, sugar-drenched ginger, and a treat called marchpane, essentially a brick of sugar paste. At first, it looked like indulgence, but sugar did its slow work. By 40, her teeth were brown. By 50, black. By 60, they were falling out of her mouth. Ambassadors wrote home that her breath smelled like a rotting carcass. One German visitor in 1597 bluntly said her breath was like that of a decayed corpse. Yet this horror became fashion. Court ladies painted their teeth black on purpose to mimic their queen. They rubbed soot or mixed honey with charcoal to fake decay, ironically speeding up their own tooth rot. Imagine walking into a glittering court, candlelight, bouncing off jewels, gowns sweeping across marble, laughter rising into the rafters, and every smile showing rows of teeth black as tombstones, breath wafting like open graves. One Italian ambassador summed it up perfectly. The English court smelled like a graveyard covered in roses. Perfume wasn't luxury there, it was survival. But rotting teeth were only the beginning. Royal women had another hidden burden: their periods. Forget sterile pads, forget cotton. They used rags, strips of cloth rinsed in cold water and hung up to dry, then used again and again for years. And how were they washed? With urine. Chamber pots were left to ferment until the liquid turned into ammonia, then poured over clothing, which meant the same fabric pressed against the most delicate parts of a queen's body was steeped in human piss. A German princess in 1456 described the stench when several noble women were menstruating at once. The Duke himself ordered all the windows flung open in the middle of winter just to breathe. Some women tried stuffing moss into small pouches, and ironically, sphagnum moss does kill bacteria, though they didn't know that. They just knew it absorbed blood. But the moss was never properly cleaned. It sat damp, rotting, reused for months until it grew colonies of its own. And bathing? Forbidden. Doctors warned that immersing a menstruating woman in water might block her flow and kill her. So every month, queens layered filth upon filth, and crawling things multiplied in that filth. Because lice were everywhere, not just on peasants, but on queens. Every royal woman in Europe had them. Delousing was part of the daily routine. Servants spent hours combing through a queen's hair, plucking lice and eggs, collecting them on a cloth and burning them. Isabeau of Bavaria was once so infested, her hair had to be shaved off, her physician giving up after counting more than 1,000 lice on just one patch of her scalp. But here's the shocking part: many thought lice were holy. Saint Margaret of Hungary refused to wash, letting lice crawl across her face as she prayed, believing each bite was a blessing from God. Fleas were even worse. The rush mats that covered palace floors were never cleaned. They rotted, turned black with filth, and seethed with fleas. Witnesses at Hampton Court swore the floors seemed to move with them. Noble women wore flea traps under their dresses, small tubes filled with blood or honey to lure insects away from their skin. Some even kept flea dogs, tiny pets whose only purpose was to serve as bait, absorbing the endless bites that would otherwise land on their mistresses. And still the parasites won. Archaeologists found lice eggs preserved in the burial gown of Queen Isabella of Aragon, still clinging to the fabric 500 years after her death. And when royals grew sick, the cures were more revolting than the disease. A headache? Fresh bird droppings smeared across the forehead. Skin disease? A bath in the urine of virgin boys, collected each morning. Queen Catherine of Aragon, desperate for a male heir, was told to sit for hours over burning piles of goat dung so the smoke could awaken her womb. Instead, it scorched her flesh. Other women were told to insert pessaries made of crocodile, dung mixed with honey inside their bodies. These weren't superstitions whispered by peasants. These were official remedies prescribed by Europe's finest physicians. And childbirth was the deadliest prescription of all. A royal birth was meant to be sacred, so windows were sealed, fires stoked, and the room turned into a suffocating oven. Doctors went straight from dissecting corpses to delivering babies, never washing their hands. Queen Jane Seymour, Henry VIII's third wife, died just 11 days after giving birth. Her doctors carried death under their fingernails. The forceps they used on one woman might be wiped with a rag and shoved inside another. The result: infection, fever, death, and if a queen survived childbirth, she might not survive her husband's infidelities. When syphilis swept Europe, the cure was mercury. The saying went, "A night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury." Teeth fell out, hair vanished, skin peeled away, and madness followed. By the 1600s, noble women shaved their heads bald and wore enormous wigs to hide the devastation. These wigs were made of human hair, sometimes bought from the desperate poor, sometimes cut from corpses. They were greased with animal fat, powdered with flour, and decorated with ribbons and jewels. But underneath, a paradise for vermin, lice and fleas nested inside. Mice burrowed through the fat, and maggots wriggled freely. Queen Christina of Sweden once removed her wig in council, and witnesses watched lice pour down her shoulders. She laughed, calling them loyal subjects who never abandoned their queen. At night, wigs were left on stands where rats gnawed at them. In the morning, they were powdered again and set back on infected scalps. That powder itself was poison flour, laced with lead inhaled into the lungs day after day. One French duchess leaned forward at dinner, and maggots spilled from her wig onto her plate. She brushed them aside calmly and kept eating. And the gowns. Outer gowns worth more than a farmhouse were rarely washed. Instead, they were smoked over herbs to disguise the stench of sweat, rot, and urine. Some decomposed right on women's bodies as the fabric rotted away. Others were soaked and poisoned by enemies' arsenic, mercury, slow killers that seeped into the skin of the unsuspecting. Queens hired dress testers, servants forced to wear new gowns first, to see if they survived. And then there were those who embraced filth as devotion. Queen Isabella of Castile famously refused to change her underwear during the siege of Granada. For 8 months, she wore the same garments until they fused to her skin and had to be cut off. She considered it a triumph of piety. Saint Elizabeth of Hungary slept in her own waste. Saint Margaret of Hungary praised her lice as holy gifts. This wasn't insanity, it was celebrated. Dirt was devotion. Parasites were divine blessings. And then there are the legends that grew in such soil. Countess Elizabeth Bathory, remembered as the Blood Countess of Hungary, was said to murder 600 girls and bathe in their blood to preserve her youth. Reality? Blood clots within minutes, turns brown, and stinks of rot. Servants testified that the stench of congealed gore was so overwhelming, it made them vomit as they scraped it off her skin. Whether the stories were exaggerated or not, the fact that people believed them shows how normal filth, blood, and decay had become in the world of queens. Because these were women who already bathed in milk, painted their faces with poison, and sat for hours over burning piles of dung in the name of medicine. So next time you picture a medieval queen, don't imagine the sparkling portraits, the flowing gowns, the crowns glittering in candlelight. Imagine the reality: blackened teeth reeking like corpses, period rags steeped in piss, lice crawling from hair into wigs fattened with grease, maggots dropping onto dinner plates, gowns rotting off bodies, a queen lifting her skirts in prayer while fleas swarmed the floor, her flea dog, scratching itself raw at her feet. Imagine a court so perfumed it burned your throat just to breathe, a place where the smell of roses was never sweet, only a mask over the stench of death. That was the true royal treatment.